In this video, we're going to look at the properties of sine and cosine graphs. We want to be able to find the properties of a graph or an equation that is a sine or a cosine graph or equation, and we want to be able to also describe those transformations. So we want to start with a review of the sine and cosine curves. So remember that the sine graph goes through the origin, and then it comes up at pi over 2. It's going to hit the maximum point, which is 1, and it's going to come back down and hit the x-axis again. And then it's going to come down and hit the minimum at -1, and then remember the period is 2 pi. So at 2 pi, we're going to be back at that starting point. So this is what my cosine curve looks like, and then remember that that pattern is just going to continue. So if we just kind of go maximum, middle, minimum, middle again, we can get like a second cycle of the curve. We could keep going. We can also go backwards. So we're going to go to the minimum first since we're working backwards here, and then hit the maximum. So we can get another cycle of the graph here. So my domain is all real numbers. The graph goes left and right forever. My range is just the values between -1 and +1. My y-intercept is that point 0, 0. We have multiple x-intercepts, and we're looking at our x-intercepts are at 0, at pi, at 2 pi, at 3 pi, at -pi. So our x-intercepts are we're going to refer to that as multiples of pi. My minimum value is -1. My maximum value is +1. This graph has no asymptotes. This graph is odd. It is a function because it passes the vertical line test. Its inverse is not a function because it does not pass the horizontal line test. So I think the key to the sine graph is kind of to remember the 5 points, which is starting in the middle and then going up to the maximum, middle again, minimum, and then back to the middle. So we're going to do similarly with our cosine graph. So remember, the cosine graph starts at the maximum, so cosine starts at 1, and then it's going to come down and hit the middle, and then minimum, and then back to the middle, and then back to the maximum. So a cosine curve starts at the maximum and goes back to the maximum. So again, we're going to repeat that process again to get the second cycle of the curve. And then we can kind of keep going a little bit, and then as well we can go backwards here, so we're going to hit the middle, and then the minimum, and then the middle again, and then that maximum again. My properties are very similar for cosine as they were for sine, so my domain's all real numbers. My range is -1 to +1. My y-intercept is different. This is the point 1, 0. I'm sorry, 0, 1. The x-intercepts, again, are different. So my x-intercepts are at pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2, 5 pi over 2, 7 pi over 2. So they're at the pi over 2 values, but it's not every pi over 2 value because this is also 2 pi over 2. So it's just the pi over 2 values that are odd. So we call this odd multiples of pi over 2. My minimum value, again, is -1. My maximum value is +1, just like before. I still have no asymptotes. This symmetry is even symmetry. It is a function. Its inverse is not a function. So the graphs are very similar with the exception of their intercepts and their symmetry. With the cosine curve, again, I think what's important is to remember 5 points. Cosine curve starts at the maximum, will hit the middle, and then the minimum, and then the middle, and then back to the maximum.